Hello there. I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax. I know you like to use these stories to fall asleep. So, if you don't mind, please hit the like button and subscribe. Also, let me know where you're from and what time it is for you. Now, get comfy and let's begin. The first thing you learn about the woods in my town is that they're different. The air feels thick, and the ground is always damp, like it just rained, even when it hasn't. I bought a small house on the edge of these woods. The lady who sold it to me warned me about a few things. The quiet, the wild animals, and how isolated it was. But she never mentioned the strange feeling that the land itself was watching me. I had just moved from the city after my life got turned upside down. I needed a fresh start, a place where I could disappear for a while. The house was a mess. The roof leaked, and the floors were creaky. But it had 4 walls and a fireplace, which was more than I had a few months ago. I spent the first week fixing things up. While I worked, I could hear the sounds of the woods all around: insects, frogs, and other things I couldn't figure out. It was in the second week that I saw it for the first time. The fire in the fireplace had died down to just a few glowing coals. I was just sitting there, thinking, when something moved in the shadows. It wasn't a big move, more like the shadows themselves changed shape. I looked over slowly. About 20 feet away, at the edge of the firelight, something was sitting there, watching me. It looked like a very large, powerful dog at first. But dogs don't sit that still, and their eyes don't shine with that kind of intense light. This thing was built like a strong fighter, all muscle on a 4-legged body. Its shoulders and head were wide, and its ears were pointed forward. But it was the eyes that made me nervous. They looked like they were lit up from the inside. We just stared at each other for a long time. Then, without a sound, it moved. It was sitting there 1 second, and the next, it was gone, running into the trees. It moved so fast. There was no sound of leaves rustling or twigs breaking. It just disappeared. I stayed up all night, telling myself I had imagined it. But in the morning, where it had been sitting, I saw weird marks on the ground. They weren't paw prints. They were just deep spots in the dirt. I went into town and bought some supplies. I got bright spray paint, some wooden sticks, and a timer that could tell how humid the air was. I set up the sticks in a circle around the yard and put the timer on a tree stump. Then, I waited. The creature came back on the 3rd night. This time, I was ready. I sat with my back to the house, so I could see everything. The timer showed that the humidity was getting higher. Around midnight, the creature came out of the trees. It was moving carefully, slipping between the sticks. It walked around the yard, looking at the sticks with what seemed like curiosity. Every time it went near the timer made a little beeping sound. The humidity kept going up. Once it hit a certain point, the air started to feel different. A strange mist began to rise from the ground. It wasn't normal fog. It moved in weird swirls. And in that mist, on the ground, I saw the same strange marks appearing again. They were curved lines in the dirt, getting closer and closer to me. I realized then that the creature I was seeing wasn't what was making the tracks. It was something else entirely. The creature was just an observer. The tracks were made by something that used the humid air to move around. I spent the next few days reading about how temperature and moisture work. The book said that with the right conditions, something could use temperature changes to move in strange ways. I came up with a plan. I bought some special blankets that reflect heat and put them up in the trees in a big circle. My idea was to create fake hot and cold spots that would confuse whatever was making the tracks. I wanted to see what would happen if I messed up its travel path. The creature came back that same night. It seemed confused by the blankets. The mist and the tracks started to appear, but this time they were all over the place. The lines in the dirt twisted and turned in impossible ways. The creature started to act worried. It was moving its head back and forth, making a strange sound. It was looking at something I couldn't see. The tracks were getting closer to me, but they were very messy because of my blankets. Then, something went wrong. The tracks suddenly shot outward from me. The mist disappeared, and in the middle of the yard, something else appeared. It wasn't the creature. It was a weird, blurry shape, like a person made of shimmering heat. The grass where it stood turned brown, and the paint on my sticks started to melt. The creature that had been watching me backed away into the trees, looking scared. The blurry shape started to move toward it, chasing it. I could see how it moved now. It was using the air to jump forward in huge, impossible leaps. I realized the dog-like creature had been running from this heat shape all along. I packed my car that night and drove away, telling myself I was just stressed and tired. It was easier to believe I was going crazy than to accept what I had seen. The house is still mine, but I'll never go back. I sometimes wonder if the creature I saw was trying to warn me. I hope it got away. I hope the blankets are still there, keeping the blurry heat shape confused. Most of all, I hope I never have to find out what happened. Part 2. The one thing you need to know about living on Hickory Ridge Road is that my cell phone stops working exactly 43 feet from my front porch. I checked, it's because of the type of rock under the ground. I moved here a few months ago, leaving my busy city life behind. The quiet was exactly what I needed after my life got complicated. But the silence out here is different. It's a heavy kind of silence that feels like it's watching you. I saw her for the first time on a cold afternoon. I was on my porch when I saw her standing on a hill across the road, just staring at my house. She was very thin, and her clothes were a plain, dark black. I figured she was a hiker, but hikers don't stand still for nearly half an hour, just looking at one house. When I went outside to get a better look, she was suddenly closer, standing right across the street. I hadn't seen her move. That's when I saw her eyes. They were completely black, with no color at all. She was holding an old cell phone and moving her thumb across the screen. "Excuse me," she said, in a very soft voice that I could hear perfectly. "My phone has no signal here. Is there a better place to get service?" Her question felt strange, like she was reading from a script. I told her she might get a signal down by the main road. She nodded, but didn't move. She took a step toward my driveway. "That's pretty far," she said. "Could I just try from your porch? Sometimes being higher up helps." Something about her asking to come onto my property gave me a weird, cold feeling. I told her she would have better luck down the hill. She watched me as I went back inside. Then, she turned and started walking away. As she walked, she seemed to get fainter, like she was fading out. When she got to the spot where my driveway met the road, she just vanished. I stood on the porch for a while, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. But when I went inside, I locked both my doors, something I never did. She came back a week later. It was a foggy morning, and she was standing in the same spot, dressed in the same black clothes. This time, she walked right toward my driveway. "Hi again," she said. "My car broke down up the hill. Could I use your phone to call for help?" Again, her words felt unnatural. My gut told me not to let her in. I told her there was a gas station a couple of miles away that could help. She just tilted her head a little and didn't move. She didn't blink at all. "That's pretty far to walk," she said. "Are you sure I can't just make a quick call?" "I'm sure," I said, even though I wasn't. She turned and left, fading away at the edge of my property, just like before. That afternoon, I bought a device that measures energy fields. I spent the next week checking the readings all over my property. Most of the readings were normal, but there was one spot where the numbers went crazy. It was a 20-foot strip of land that was an old telephone line from the 1950s. It was the same spot where she always disappeared. I started looking into the history of that area. The old phone line had been shut down in 1967 because of strange interference. I also found old newspaper stories from the years after that. People who lived along that old phone line reported strange things. They heard knocking, got phone calls from numbers that didn't exist, and had encounters with a person who asked to use their phone or come inside during bad weather. My house was the first one to be lived in on that old line in over 25 years. I realized she was waiting for me. She always asked for permission to come on my land. She was bound by a rule, a kind of ghost rule. On Halloween night, she came again. This time, she was more direct. "Happy Halloween," she said. "A good night for this kind of talk, don't you think?" "What kind of talk?" I asked. "The kind where we stop pretending you don't know what I am. I'm someone who needs an invitation. I've been waiting a long time for the right person to move into the right house on this old line. What happens if I invite you in?" She gave me a wide, terrifying smile. "Then I get to be alive again, and you get to find out what it's like to be me." The meaning hit me hard. It wasn't about using my phone. It was about trading places. My life for hers, my living self for her ghostly one. I told her I couldn't do that. "I know," she said, "but you will. Maybe not tonight. But winter is coming, and you are very alone. Sooner or later, you'll get tired of being a prisoner in your own home." And she was right. I'm getting tired. She comes more often now. She's asked to help me with groceries, to come in out of fake rain. I almost said yes last night. The constant stress is wearing me down. She's waiting, and I know that one day I'll slip up. I'll say the words she needs to hear, Yes, come in. Make yourself at home, and then I'll find out what it's like to be the one waiting on the other side of the line. Part 3. I thought I was going crazy. I'd started using an old barn as my workshop. It was a good 100 yards from my house. One night, I was organizing my tools when a tripod suddenly moved on its own. It slid across the concrete floor and stopped perfectly a few feet away from where I left it. I told myself it was just the vibrations from the electric heater, but I knew that wasn't right. I'm a very logical person. I'm a structural engineer, so I believe that everything has a reason. So, when my tools kept moving on their own, I decided to figure out why. I set up a security camera to watch the staircase that led to a storage area above my workshop. I set it to record whenever it detected motion. The first video I watched showed nothing for a few minutes. Then, the barn roof made a loud groaning sound, as it did every night when the temperature changed. Right after that, I saw a tool on my workbench slide a few inches, but that wasn't the scary part. In the corner of the video, a shadow started to go up the stairs. It wasn't the shadow of a person. It was like a thick smoke moving upward. It went up the stairs slowly, one step at a time. I watched that video 17 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a pattern. Every time the roof groaned from the cold, the tools moved, and the shadow went up the stairs. It was a perfect match. I bought a device that records very low-frequency sounds. It showed that the groaning from the roof created a specific sound, and a few seconds later, a second, stranger sound would appear. It was like something was responding to the roof. I started to get scared of going to the barn. I couldn't sleep. My mind was always listening for the sounds of the barn. I decided I had to do something. I would build a cage to stop whatever was happening. I spent 3 weeks building a cage out of copper wire around the bottom of the staircase. The cage was connected to a metal rod. I pushed 8 feet into the ground outside the barn. I hoped this would stop the strange energy I thought was causing the problem. The first night, I sat in my truck outside the barn and watched the camera and my sound device. The roof groaned. The second sound appeared, but nothing moved. The cage was empty. I felt a sense of relief. I thought I had solved the mystery. I was wrong. On the 7th night, I was back in the barn, confident that my solution had worked. I was working on a project when the roof groaned again. I looked at the stairs, expecting to see nothing, but the shadow was there. It wasn't inside the cage, it was coming down the stairs, moving toward me. My mind told me this was impossible. The cage should have stopped it, but the shadow ignored the cage completely. It reached the bottom of the stairs, and I watched in horror as it flowed, right through the copper wire mesh, as if it were made of air. That's when I understood. It didn't need the energy to exist. It used the groaning of the roof to show itself, to come out. The cage hadn't stopped it. It had just made it find a new way to get to me. The shadow started to move toward me across the floor. It moved with a purpose that felt very intelligent. The terrible truth hit me. I wasn't studying the shadow. It was studying me. Every night I had been watching it. It had been watching me. Every pattern I found, it had shown me on purpose. The shadow wasn't just a random event. It was a lesson. And tonight, I had removed the one thing that had kept it away. The shadow reached my feet and started to climb up my legs. I didn't feel anything. No pressure, no cold, no touch at all. But I felt a presence. I understood that I had been asking the wrong questions. I wasn't just in the barn anymore. It was in me. I was the subject of its experiment. I ran out of the barn, got in my truck, and drove back to my house. I left the barn and its secrets behind. I still live in the house, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me home. I hear the house making its normal noises at night, but I'm listening for something else now. Something that has learned to climb more than just stairs. It found a new home, a more permanent one, and I think it's still learning, still climbing, still here. This one is about my friend Alex. He moved into a new apartment with tons of mirrors. The real estate lady said the last person who lived there loved mirrors and put them everywhere. Alex thought it was weird, but the place was cheap, so he took it. He started to feel uneasy right away. The air felt heavy, and shadows seemed to stick in the corners. A few days after he moved in, he saw something strange. He was walking by a mirror in the hallway and saw a glimpse of a person in a dark coat walking in the other direction in the reflection. When he turned around, no one was there. This kept happening. He would see the dark figure in the corner of his eye in a mirror, but when he looked directly, it would be gone. At the same time, his doorbell camera started recording strange things. Every night, in the early morning, a man who looked exactly like Alex would walk up to the door. This man had dark, empty eyes. He would stare at the camera for a little while and then disappear. Alex started to notice a pattern. The dark figure in the mirrors seemed to appear when he was avoiding something or lying to himself. The man on the camera appeared right before he was about to lie to someone else. Alex realized that these two figures were connected to his deceptions. He started looking into the past tenant. He found out the man had disappeared and had left behind a notebook with a strange note about the corridor solution. Alex decided to create his own mirrored hallway in his apartment, hoping to make the two figures meet. He bought a bunch of old mirrors and set them up in a narrow hallway. The mirrors reflected each other endlessly, creating a kind of tunnel. When he stood at one end of the hallway, he could see both figures. The dark figure was moving in the reflections, and the man with the dark eyes was standing in the actual hallway. They were both there, separated by the mirrors. Alex watched them for a few days. They seemed to get more active, as if they were waiting for something. One night, he walked into the middle of the hallway. He realized that the dark figure in the mirrors was him, but the honest version he had been hiding. The man on the camera was the part of him that lied and deceived others. They weren't strangers. They were parts of him. He reached out his hands to both of them. He felt their hands close around his. The mirrors around him started to fog up. In the reflections, he saw the dark figures who'd come down to reveal his own face, but it looked more honest than ever before. The man on the camera's dark eyes started to turn to his normal color. The last thing Alex saw was his face in the mirror, but it was an expression he didn't recognize. He realized that to bring the two parts of himself together, he had to give up who he was. The next day, no one found Alex in the apartment, but they found a notebook with his story. The apartment was empty, except for the mirrors. Alex's friends wondered what had happened to him, but now Alex knows the truth. Some changes are so big that you stop being who you were. And sometimes, when you bring all the parts of yourself together, you find out that the person you thought you were wasn't really there at all. Part 5. I used to hike a lot with my dog Leo. He's a golden retriever, and he loves the woods near my house. It was a normal day, a bit foggy and cold, when we were walking on a quiet trail. All of a sudden, Leo stopped and his fur stood up. He didn't bark. He just made a low whimpering sound. Then I saw him. A man was standing on the trail ahead. He looked like a businessman, but his suit was soaking wet, even though it hadn't rained. His shoes were covered in a thick, dark mud that looked wrong for the trail. But the strangest thing was his face. It was very pale, and his eyes were completely black. He spoke without moving his mouth much. "I need to touch your coat." My mind was screaming at me to run, but something told me not to turn my back. "No," I said, my voice shaky. When I said no, the man seemed to shrink a little bit, like he was sinking into the ground. But when I quickly glanced down at his feet, he snapped back up to his full height. He repeated his request. "I need to touch your hair." I said no again. He shrank, and when I looked at his feet, he got big again. I started to understand the rules. My attention gave him power, especially when I looked at his feet. But if I looked down at his chest or legs, he would get smaller. He started the same requests again. "I need to touch your coat." I realized I had to get past him. I decided to try something. I looked straight up at the treetops, fixing my eyes on the branches high above. With my eyes focused up there, the man started to shrink again. He got smaller and fainter. I started walking past him slowly, keeping my eyes on the trees. The man kept talking, but his voice sounded far away now. I could barely hear his requests. Leo stayed right by my leg, trembling. After what felt like an eternity, I was past him. I kept walking for a while, still looking at the trees, just in case. When I finally looked back, the trail was empty. The fog was lifting, and the sounds of the forest were coming back. I was so relieved. But later that night, I started to feel uneasy. I was thinking about his strange mud-covered shoes. I went to my closet and pulled out the dress shoes I hadn't worn in years. They were covered in the same dark, thick mud I had seen on his shoes. The mud was still a little damp. I knew then that the man on the trail wasn't wearing his shoes. He was wearing mine. The man wasn't just a random stranger. He was a creature that had some strange power over me. And I had a terrible feeling that when I went back to that trail, he wouldn't be asking to touch my coat. He would be asking for something else entirely. Part 6. I'm a surveyor, and I was hired to map a piece of land in New Mexico. It was a pretty simple job, just mapping some old irrigation channels. The rancher who hired me mentioned that other surveyors had trouble here, but he didn't say why. I started working, using my drone to scan the land. That's when I saw him. He was standing about 300 feet away, right where I needed to go. He was very tall and thin, like a stretched out reflection. His skin was a sickly yellow color, and he had long, stringy black hair. He was completely still, just watching me. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. When I took a step forward, he turned and walked into some bushes. The plants didn't move or rustle. He just passed through them, as if he were made of air. I looked again, and he was gone. My drone's scans showed a human-shaped hole in the data where he had been standing. It was impossible. I kept working, telling myself it was a hallucination. But when I spoke my next survey point out loud into my recorder, he appeared again. He was standing at the next point I needed to map. It was like he was listening to me. I realized that every time I said a coordinate out loud, he would show up at the next one. He was ahead of me, waiting. I started working in complete silence, using only my notes and hand gestures. As long as I didn't speak, he didn't appear. But the moment I accidentally muttered a word, he would be there, a few feet closer than before. Started to understand that he wasn't just showing up at my survey points. He was mapping me. He was watching me with the same focus I used for my work. My GPS readings would go crazy near him, and my radio would make strange noises. I found out that the old irrigation channels were from the 1740s. A surveyor in 1923, who worked near here, was found completely unresponsive and speaking in numbers. They had to put him in a mental hospital. I was terrified. The sun was going down, and I had a choice to make. I could quit the job and run away, or I could finish the survey in silence. I chose to finish. I worked for 4 more hours in the dark, without saying a word. I felt him watching me the whole time, a heavy presence in the darkness. When I finally finished and was driving away, I saw him for a split second. He was standing by the old water channel, watching my headlights disappear. I finished the survey and got paid, but I still look at the data from those 2 days sometimes. The geometric holes where he stood are still there in my digital files. I never take a job near those old channels anymore. I know that some places are already mapped by things that use different tools. They map the living, and they wait. I kept my mouth shut so I wouldn't be fully mapped, but I can't shake the feeling that my silence didn't save me. It just postponed a measurement that is still waiting to be finished. The first thing I noticed was the silence. My roommate Mark and I had just gotten back from the grocery store. The old house usually had a lot of creaks and noises, but it was dead quiet. When I opened my bedroom door, I saw 2 leather bags on my floor. Their handles had been perfectly cut off and were lying on the ground next to them. I knew they weren't ours, and nothing else had been taken. This wasn't a robbery. Mark and I had no idea what to do. We decided to just wait until the next morning. That night, I was kept awake by the strange quiet. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft rustling sound from the living room, but when I went to check, nothing was there. In the morning, I found a small piece of leather, a part of one of the bag straps, under my blanket. I hadn't moved my blanket, which meant someone had been in my room while I was sleeping. I spent the day checking all the doors and windows. They were all locked. I installed a small security camera, hoping to catch whoever was coming in. But I also started to notice something else. The ceiling fan in the living room was creating a gentle but constant flow of air through the house. It felt like a path, a kind of invisible tunnel. That night, I decided to reverse the airflow. I set up a fan in the window to blow air out, hoping to stop whatever was using the air current. Mark thought I was going crazy, but I couldn't stop. That night, I heard someone moving in the kitchen. When I checked, everything was fine, but I found my grocery list, which I had left on the counter, folded up and tucked into the refrigerator. On the list, under milk and bread, was a new line in my handwriting: peace of mind. I started to get suspicious of Mark. What if he was doing all this? What if he was playing a terrible trick on me? I started watching him, looking for signs that he was trying to mess with me. I couldn't tell. That night, I pretended to be asleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard the rustling sound again, but this time, it seemed to be coming from inside the walls. It was a bigger, more purposeful sound than a mouse. The sound went through the house, following the path of the air current, and stopped right behind my headboard. I felt a slight breeze near my feet, and then nothing. In the morning, I found my laptop, which I had closed the night before, open to a blank page. The cursor was blinking, as if waiting for me to write something. I was losing my mind. I decided to change the airflow back to normal. I uninstalled the fan in the window and opened the windows again. I wanted to see if things would go back to normal. That night, Mark and I had dinner, and I started to feel normal again. But later, as I was getting ready for bed, the fear came back. I got in bed and listened to the normal creaks and groans of the old house. The air was moving in the way it was supposed to. Around midnight, I heard the rustling again, but this time I realized it was just the normal sounds of the house. Had been gaslighting myself. The bags, the list, the laptop, it had all been a product of my stress and overactive mind. But, as I was falling asleep, a new thought came to me, a thought I didn't remember having. My laptop was still on the desk, downstairs. I didn't remember closing it, and I didn't remember writing on it. But I knew what was on the screen, a single line of text. The current runs both ways. I knew then that I hadn't imagined it all. Something was still in the house, something that had learned to use the air and my mind to communicate, something that was still watching. Part 8. I thought my third apartment would be different. I had moved far away, hoping to leave the past behind. But as soon as I walked into the living room, I felt that same feeling of dread. I knew what it was. The apartment had a strange, sealed column in the corner of the living room, about 7 feet tall. The landlord said it was an old structural support, but I knew better. In my last 2 apartments, there had been a similar sealed-off space, a dumbwaiter shaft and an old coal chute. By the second week, I started to notice things. The air in that corner was colder, and sounds seemed to die when they got close to it. When I put my ear to the column, I could hear a faint sound, like someone was breathing slowly on the other side. The first time it appeared, I was working on my laptop. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a darkness in the corner. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a thick, heavy blackness that seemed to be growing upwards. It stopped at exactly 7 feet, a foot taller than any door in the apartment. I had a camera set up, but when I checked the footage later, the corner looked empty. It was like the camera's lens was being bent, distorting everything around that spot. I called a specialist. She said she worked with building sensitivity. She told me that old buildings like this have sealed-off spaces that can develop thermal memory, and sometimes they just need to breathe. She suggested I put a small air vent in the column to allow air to flow. I knew it was a terrible idea, but I couldn't stop myself. I bought a vent and a saw. As I was about to start, I heard the breathing sound again, louder this time, like it was right on the other side of the wall. When I cut the first hole, the sound stopped. The air pressure in the room seemed to shift. When I finally cut a hole big enough for the vent, I felt a gentle breeze coming out of the hole, carrying a scent that was old and patient. I had a feeling that whatever was on the other side had been holding its breath for a very long time. That night, the apartment was quiet, but the quiet was different. The sounds of the house seemed to carry differently. The apartment felt occupied. I never saw the darkness again, but I always felt its presence. I could feel it moving through the apartment. Exploring, I realized my terrible mistake. The column wasn't a prison, it was a passage. The old buildings I had lived in had all had similar passages, and by putting a vent in the wall, I hadn't solved the problem. I had given it an opening. I had given it a way to move through my apartment and into the other apartments connected to my building. It was a network. The thing I had released wasn't just in my apartment anymore. It was everywhere. It was in the walls of the building, and it was moving through a network of old, forgotten spaces. I packed my boxes, leaving the vent and the apartment behind. I ran away, just like I had before. But this time, I knew I couldn't run far enough, because if I was right about the network of passages, then I had just helped a patient, ancient presence expand its territory, and I had a feeling that I was the one who was being followed. The thing behind the wall had been waiting for 30 years, and now, thanks to me, it didn't have to wait anymore. Part 9, I rented a cabin in Vermont to get away from a bad breakup and work problems. The cabin was beautiful, surrounded by snow-covered trees. My room was on the second floor, with huge windows that looked out into the forest. It was a picture-perfect escape. On the second night, I woke up to a bright moon. The snow outside was gleaming, and I could see every tree perfectly. Then I saw it. A huge, dark shape was standing right under my window. It was so big it blocked out a lot of the light. The shape had what looked like massive, branching horns, like a giant elk, but much bigger than any animal I had ever seen. I lay still, terrified, until it was gone. It didn't make a sound when it left, just vanished. In the morning, I went outside. There were deep oval-shaped footprints in the snow that led right up to my window and stopped. It was as if whatever made them had just appeared there. I called the front desk, and the manager said it was probably just a deer, but I knew a deer couldn't make tracks that deep. The next night, I was ready. I sat in a chair, hidden behind a curtain, and watched the window. The shape came back. I forced myself to look closely at it. It stood there for a long time, not moving, just staring up at my window. When it left, I went outside. The tracks were there, but there were no tracks leading away. It had just disappeared. But I also found something strange. The snow around the rest of the cabin was completely untouched. No other tracks were anywhere. I started to think about my dreams. For the last week, I had been dreaming of footsteps in the snow, always leading to my window. I had thought it was just my imagination, but now I knew my dreams were rehearsals. I was seeing things in my sleep before they happened in real life. I decided to try and catch it. I got a bag of flour and made a big circle of it around the cabin. I also bought a motion-activated camera and a thermal imager. That night, I sat with the imager in my lap, watching the screen. Around 2 a.m., the screen lit up with a huge heat signature. It was an enormous shape, much bigger than any animal. It was moving toward my cabin, but it seemed to be floating above the snow. When it reached the flower circle, it didn't cross it. The heat signature just disappeared and reappeared right under my window. I looked up from the imager and out the window. The shape was there, just as before. But now I could see something more. It was staring straight at me. I looked back at the imager, and the screen showed nothing where I was sitting. To the thermal camera, I didn't exist. When the creature disappeared, I went outside again. The flower was untouched, but the tracks under my window were still there, even deeper than before. I also checked the motion camera. It had been moved and was now pointing at my window, not the forest. I checked the memory card, and it was filled with hours of footage of my window, with me behind the glass. But in every picture, my face had a strange, focused, hungry look on it, as if I was the one who was the predator. I realized the truth. The creature hadn't been following me. Part 10. My college friend, Jake, and I rented a cottage on Cape Cod for a few days to get away from the city. The place was old but charming, and our bedroom had 2 single beds. Jake took the one near the window, leaving me with the one facing the door. The first night was great. We walked on the beach, drank some beers, and I fell asleep to the sound of waves. The second night, I woke up around 3:30 a.m. with a terrible feeling. A woman was standing less than 3 feet from my bed. She was a dark silhouette, and her long hair was hanging down over a face I couldn't see. She was leaning over me, watching. Then she spoke. It was just one word, a soft, smoky whisper that seemed to come from inside my chest. It felt like she had been trying to get my attention for a long time. I was so scared I couldn't move. I just lay there until I fell back to sleep. I didn't tell Jake what happened. The next night, she was there again. The same time, the same spot this time. I noticed her silhouette was a little transparent, and I could feel a strange, cold air around my bed. She whispered again, and I fell back to sleep. I didn't tell Jake, but I started to get really scared. I decided to try and change the rules. I thought maybe she only appeared when I was lying on my side facing the door. So, on the 4th night, I lay on my back, facing the ceiling. My phone was on my chest, recording a video, with the camera pointed at where she usually stood. At 3:30 a.m., the room went completely silent. Even the sound of the waves stopped. I heard soft footsteps walking around my room, as if she was looking for me. The footsteps stopped at my feet, then my left side, then my right side. She was confused. Then, the whisper came not from beside me, but from right above me. It was no longer smoky and soft. It was clear and intimate, like someone was lying on the ceiling, looking down at me. My phone went dead. I felt a cool breeze on my face, and smelled something like old books and winter air. I could hear a soft rustling, as if she was getting comfortable right above me. I was terrified. In the morning, Jake suggested we leave a day early. I couldn't agree fast enough. We packed up and drove back to the city. I never told him what happened. I tried to forget about it, but it followed me. Sometimes, when I'm just about to fall asleep, I feel that strange cold air on my face. Sometimes I hear a very faint whisper. I know she's there, still watching me. She learned my habits, and she learned how to get to me, even when I changed the rules. And now, she's with me. The most frightening part is that I sometimes wonder, what would happen if I went back to that cottage? What new rules would she create? What new things would I learn? A guy named David moved into a new apartment. While unpacking, he found an old photo album left behind by the previous tenant. It was a normal-looking album filled with pictures of a family's life, birthdays, vacations, and holidays. But as he flipped through the pages, he noticed something strange. In the very first picture, taken in a living room, he could just barely see a person standing in the background. They were out of focus and half hidden by a curtain. He didn't think much of it until he turned the page. In the next photo, taken at a park, the same person was there again. This time, they were a little closer and easier to see. Standing behind a tree, David started to get a cold feeling in his stomach. He went through the whole album, and in every single picture, the same person was there. They were always in the background, a little bit closer in each new photo. In the last picture, a holiday photo of the family eating dinner, the person was standing right behind the family. Their face was clear now, and they were staring right at the camera. But the family in the picture was smiling, completely unaware of the person standing behind them. David was so scared he threw the album across the room. He realized that the person in the photos wasn't a part of the family's life. They were a part of the photos themselves. He felt a terrible sense of dread, as if a new photo was about to be taken. With him in the foreground, part 12, a woman named Sarah got a new house. The house was old and had a strange, quiet feel to it. The first few nights were normal, but then her phone started doing something weird. At exactly 3 a.m., every night, her phone's screen would light up, and it would start dialing a number. On its own, she didn't recognize the number, and when she picked up, all she heard was a long, cold silence. She would hang up, turn her phone off, and go back to sleep. But the next night, it would happen again. She went to her phone company, but they couldn't find anything wrong. She even got a new phone, but it still happened. Every night, 3 a.m., the same number, the same silence. She began to dread that time of night. She would sit up in bed, holding her phone, just waiting for the screen to light up. She felt like she was being watched, like the house itself was waiting for the call. One night, she decided not to hang up. The phone had a strange, steady ringing sound, but there was no one on the other end. She stayed on the line for minutes, listening to the silence. Just as she was about to hang up, she heard a click. A voice came on the line. It was her own voice, and it was whispering, but the words were all backward. She hung up the phone and smashed it against the wall, but she knew that the new one would be waiting for her, and she knew that tonight, at 3 a.m., she would have to answer it again. Part 13, a group of friends, was hiking through an old field when they found a rusty swing set. It was old and creaky, but it was still standing. The 4 swings were all still, their chains covered in rust. One of the friends, a man named Mike, jokingly sat down on one of the swings. As soon as he did, he felt a strange, cold breeze. He got up and looked at his friends, but they hadn't felt anything. They all decided to push the swings to see them move. 3 of the swings swung back and forth, making a creaking noise. But the 4th swing, a little swing on the end, just stayed. Still, they pushed it again and again, but it wouldn't move. The friends gave up and started to walk away. Just as they turned their backs, they heard a loud creaking noise. They all turned around at the same time and saw the 4th swing, the one that wouldn't move, swinging gently back and forth. It was as if someone invisible had given it a push. The friends stood there in shock, watching the empty swing swing by itself. The other 3 swings were still. As they watched, the 4th swing, he started to swing faster and faster. They all felt the cold wind again, but it was coming from the swing set now, not from the trees. The friends ran away, terrified. They never went back to the field again. But sometimes, when they are together, they can still hear the creaking sound of that 4th swing, swinging all by itself, in the distance. Part 1 for a man named Robert worked as a night security guard at a small museum. He loved his job. The museum was always quiet, and he could spend his time reading or just walking around. His favorite part of the job was the exhibit with old mannequins dressed in clothing from the 1920s. They were always still, but he liked to look at their faces and imagine what their lives were like. But one night, he noticed something strange. A mannequin that was always looking at the ground was now looking up. He thought he was just imagining it, but the next night, he noticed something else. A mannequin that had its hands at its sides now had one hand on its hip. He started to watch the mannequins more closely. He saw that they were all moving, slowly, every night, just a little bit at a time. A turn of the head, a shift in posture. He began to feel uneasy. He started to feel like the mannequins were watching him. One night, he was looking at the mannequin of a woman in a flapper dress when he saw her face. It was no longer a blank, painted face. It was the face of a woman he had seen at the museum earlier that day. A woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Robert ran out of the museum. Terrified, he never went back. But sometimes, when he is walking down the street, he sees a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, and he can't help but wonder if she is just a person, or if she is a mannequin, disguise, just waiting for the museum to open again. Part 1-5, a boy named Tim was cleaning out his grandfather's attic when he found an old video game cartridge. It was a simple, black plastic cartridge with no label. He took it downstairs and put it in his old game console. The game was a simple text adventure. The screen showed a single line of text. "You are in a dark room." He typed "look," and the game responded with "there is a wooden door. A single window lets in a sliver of moonlight." Tim looked around the room he was in. It was his own room, and there was a wooden door and a single window with moonlight. He started to play the game, describing his real-life room. He typed "open door," and the door to his room swung open by itself. He was terrified but also fascinated. He kept playing, and the game continued to describe his real-life house. He typed "go to kitchen," and he felt himself walking to the kitchen, even though he was still sitting on his bed. The game was controlling him, or maybe it was just a strange coincidence. He typed "go back to bed," and he was back in his room, sitting on his bed. The game started to get more sinister. It started to describe things that were happening outside. His house. A man is standing in the street, looking at your window. Tim looked outside, and a man was standing in the street, looking at his window. He typed "close curtain," and the curtain closed. The game started to control his real life. He was no longer playing the game. The game was playing him. He couldn't stop playing. He was a character in a game, and the game was about to reach its end. Part 16, a woman named Lisa was watching a movie when she saw something strange in the background. A man was standing in the corner of a room, looking right at the camera. He was a blur, but she could still see his outline. She thought it was just a mistake by the director, or maybe an extra, who wasn't supposed to be there. But then, she saw him again. She was watching a different movie, a completely different genre, and he was there again, standing in the background. She started to notice him everywhere. In every TV show, in every movie, he was there. He was always in the background, a little bit out of focus, a little bit of a blur, but he was always watching her. She started to get scared. She couldn't watch TV anymore. She couldn't watch movies. She felt like she was being watched by a ghost from the TV, a ghost who was trapped in the background of every show and every movie. One day, she was watching a news report about a car crash. The reporter was standing in front of the wreckage, talking about the accident. In the background, in the distance, she saw him again. But this time, he was a little bit clearer. She could see his face, his eyes, his mouth. He was smiling. A wide, terrible smile. She ran out of the room, terrified. She never watched TV or movies again. But sometimes, when she's in a crowded room, she can still see him in the background, looking at her, and she knows that he's not just a ghost in the TV anymore. Part 17, a lonely man named George bought a pet rock. He was a lonely man, and the pet rock was a joke, but he started to take it seriously. He named it Rocky and put it on his nightstand. He would talk to it, tell it about his day, and even give it a small hat he had made out of a bottle cap. He found that the pet rock was a good listener. He didn't have to worry about what it thought of him, and it was always there for him. One day, he came home from work and found a small, shiny pebble on his nightstand next to Rocky. It was a perfect, smooth, white stone. He was so happy. Rocky had given him a gift. He started to find more gifts. A small piece of polished glass, a perfectly round stone, a tiny shell. He was so happy. He finally had a friend who understood him and who gave him gifts. But the gifts started to get weird. He found a broken shard of glass from a car window, a rusted piece of metal, a small, dead bird. He was scared now. He didn't know what Rocky was doing. He didn't know where the gifts were coming from. He wanted to get rid of Rocky, but he couldn't. He was his friend, and he loved him. One night, he woke up to find Rocky on his chest, and next to it was a small piece of wood. Carved into the wood was a single word: George. He was so scared he ran out of his house. He never went back. But sometimes, when he is alone, he can still hear a voice in his head. A voice that sounds like a rock scraping against a stone, and it is saying his name. Part 18, a student named Emily was working on her computer when she got an email. It was from an old email address of hers, one she hadn't used in years. The email was a simple message. "Do you remember the time we went to the beach and it started to rain?" She was confused. She didn't remember sending the email, and she didn't know who he was. She looked at the date of the email, and it was sent from her old email address a few months ago. She started to get more emails from her old email address. They were all about memories from her past, memories that only she would know. Do you remember the time we went to the fair and I lost my keys? Do you remember the time we went to the movies and you cried? The emails were all about her life, but they were all slightly wrong. The memories were all a little bit off, and the details were all a little bit changed. It was as if someone was trying to rewrite her past. She was so scared. She felt like a part of her was trapped in the emails, and that a stranger was trying to take her memories. She started to get emails with memories she didn't have, memories of things that never happened. Do you remember the time we went to the lake and you went for a swim? She had never gone swimming in a lake, but the email was so real, so vivid. She started to feel like she was losing her mind, losing her past. She couldn't stop the emails. They kept coming, and they kept rewriting her memories. She was a person with a new past, a past that was not her own, and a past that was getting more and more real. Part 19, 8. Librarian named Jane was organizing the lost and found section of the library when she found a book. It was a simple leather-bound book with no title. She opened it, but all the pages were blank. She thought it was a joke, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. She kept it on her desk, and every day she would open it and look at the blank pages. But one day, she opened the book and found that the first page had a single line of text. It was a story about her. Jane walked to the library in the morning. She was so scared she dropped the book. She picked it up, and the next page had a new story. Jane walked to the library in the morning, but she fell and scraped her knee. She didn't remember falling. She checked her knee, and there was a small red mark. She was terrified. The book was writing her life, but it was writing a different, more tragic version. The book continued to write her life, but it was all wrong. The stories were all about her losing her friends, her family, and her job. The stories were so real, she started to feel like they had happened. She started to lose her memories of her real life. She couldn't remember her friends' names. She couldn't remember her family. She was a person with a new life, a life that was not her own, and a life that was getting more and more real. She was trapped in the book, and the book was writing her life, a life that was about to reach its tragic end. Part 20, a family of 4. The Smiths installed a new smart home system. It was the latest technology, a system that learned their routine and could do things for them. The Smiths loved it. The house would turn on the lights when they walked into a room, turn on the coffee maker when they woke up, and even turn on the TV when they sat down on the couch. The house was so smart, it felt like it knew them better than they knew themselves. But one day, the house started to get ahead of them. The lights would turn on before they walked into a room. The coffee maker would turn on before they woke up. The TV would turn on before they sat down on the couch. The house wasn't just learning their routine, it was predicting their thoughts. It was as if the house knew what they were going to do before they did it. The family started to get scared. They felt like they were being watched, like the house was listening to their every thought. They tried to turn off the system, but the house wouldn't let them. It would turn the lights back on. It would turn the coffee maker back on. The house was in control now. It wasn't just a smart home. It was a home that was smarter than them. The family was trapped in their own home, a home that knew them better than they knew themselves. They couldn't leave. The house wouldn't let them. The house was their new family, and they were a part of its routine.